Here are some more general tips and things to keep in mind when you're taking the math test of the SATs. So first, be sure to not spend too much time trying to solve a particularly difficult problem. For example, if you find yourself sitting there just confused and looking at the paper, just skip the question you're working on and come back to it later if there's time. This will help you make sure that you don't run out of time to answer all of the questions, because every single question on the test has an equal weight on your score. So it's definitely a better bet to skip a hard question and not have time for it than to spend extra time solving it and lose time to solve multiple easier questions that may come later on. On a question, it's also often useful to eliminate options. For example, questions that ask for an equation as an answer will usually have two choices that represent one type of equation and another two that represent a different type. For example, two answers could feature an exponential equation, whereas two could feature a linear equation. Based on the context of the problem, it's usually pretty easy to eliminate two of the answers immediately, leaving you with only two to work with. If you're unsure of the answer, this also makes it more likely that your guess will be correct, as you only have to choose from two now instead of all four. Another general tip to keep in mind is to take advantage of the formula sheet you're given. Although some problems might be solvable without them, it's often faster to use the formulas and save time. Finally, here are some tips for how to solve systems of equations, which is a very common type of problem that's featured on the math test. When two variables add up to create a total, whether or not the variables are given to you or in a word problem, you should create a system of equations to find each variable. You should always also make sure you know the format the final answer is going to be in. Make sure you read the whole question, and if necessary, underline or highlight the part that tells you exactly what kind of answer the question is looking for. For example, if you're solving for a variable like x, the question may end up asking you what 3x is. So don't forget to also find 3x after you solve for x by multiplying the answer you find by 3. Furthermore, in two variable systems of equations, oftentimes the question will ask you to find something like, what is 2x plus y? Now, obviously, you could solve it first by finding the values of x and y separately, and then performing the operations on those two variables to find the answer you're looking for. However, in these two variable questions, oftentimes you can find the answer simply by performing some sort of operation on the equation given. For example, take the example problem I talked about earlier. Say the question asks you to find 2x plus y. Oftentimes, one of the equations given will have something like 4x plus 2y. There, you see that it's a lot easier to simply divide both sides of that equation by 2 to find the answer, instead of finding x and y separately and multiplying x by 2 and adding it to y and going through that whole thing.
Now, let's look at some examples to identify more specific strategies. First of all, for the calculator portion, it is important to understand when to use a calculator and when not to. On one hand, you should certainly take advantage of having one, because it will help you save time. Never spend too much time manually calculating something that can be easily done using a calculator. For example, let's say that at some point during a problem, you need to find what 16 squared is. Although you may be able to figure this out by hand, it will almost certainly be much faster to enter this into a calculator. On the other hand, keep in mind that there is no question on the test that can be solved only using a calculator. Therefore, do not overcomplicate things by trying to solve every single problem with a calculator. Some questions are just more easily solvable without one. Besides, you will need to know how to do manual calculations on the no calculator portion of the test. One way that you can make manual multiplication easier is by using a trick that can be applied to any number that ends with a zero. All you have to do is remove the zero from the end of the number, and then complete the calculation. After that, you can simply add the zero back into your answer. Here's an example. If you are tasked with multiplying 25 by 20, all you have to do is remove the zero from the 20. This gives you 25 times 2, which is 50. Then just add the zero back at the end, and you have the final answer, 500. Using this trick can help you finish problems on both sections much faster. Now, let's look at a sample question from the test. This question gives you a real-life situation, the number of miles of paved road in a county, and asks you to form an equation representing it. Take a look at the answer choices, and you'll see that they are all linear equations. The difference between these choices lies in the slope and y-intercept of the equations. In order to identify these, it is important to look for specific keywords in the question. Whenever you are asked to form a linear equation using such information, words like per or each usually suggest that the respective number represents the slope. This means it will be attached to the variable in the question. Looking at this question, the word each is present in the phrase 8 miles of new paved roads each year. This should instantly indicate that the number 8 will be attached to the variable, in this case n. Therefore, you can use the elimination method to rule out options A and B, as they do not include 8n. This leaves you with options C and D. Now, all you have to do is identify the y-intercept, or the starting point, assuming that n equals 0. In this case, n equals 0 represents the year 2014, and the very first sentence tells you that there were 783 miles of paved road at this time. Therefore, the correct answer is option C. Now, let's look at a slightly more complicated question involving an equation. This question requires you to turn m into 1/2 m and turn v into 2v to match the conditions described in the question. Then you need to compare this new equation to the original one. However, let's say that you are confused and are not sure how to do this algebraically. In questions like these, it is always useful to simply substitute random numbers of your choosing and solve the equation. For example, let's set m equal to 2 and v equal to 3. If you were to substitute these into the original equation and solve, you would get ke equals 9. Now, if you were to apply the conditions that the question asks for, all you need to do is take half of m equals 2 and double v equals 3. This gives you m equals 1 and v equals 6. If you were to substitute these new values into the original equation, you would end up with ke equals 18, which is double that of the original equation. Therefore, the correct answer is C, as the kinetic energy is doubled. This particular technique will always work, no matter which numbers you choose to set m and v equal to. We hope that these tips will help you to do well on the math sections of the SAT. Good luck with your exam!